Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of Talking Germany, the show where we do just that. And my guest today is the outstanding film director and producer, Nico Hofmann. And here he is in person. Thank you very, very much for joining us here today on Talking Germany. Wonderful, great stuff. Now, it's absolutely astonishing. I can tell you how many films Nico Hofmann has been involved in. His devotion to the business is, I think it's fair to say, almost manic. And his special fascination is making movies about Germany's difficult recent history. Indeed, it has been said that Nico Hofmann is obsessed with German history. And you're smiling a wee little bit as I say that, but it's not just been said of you. I have a quote about you. You said of yourself, "I am obsessed by German history." And then you added, to such an extent, in fact, that it is not normal.
I did say that, yeah.
I don't know, you have
I'm
been...
shocked.
But where does it all come from?
Actually, I think it started really by my own family stories in my own family. And I was trained as a journalist, and during the training time, I studied some research on the story of my family in Mannheim, where I come from. And in the moment where you start to discuss the own family background, the own family biographies, you immediately come to the part of the Third Reich and you ask your parents, what have you done as a soldier? What have you done as a Bund Deutscher Mädchen? My mother was very young. She was 14 when the Third Reich ended. And so immediately you start to discuss your family stories also in the times between 33 and 45. OK. That's what we're going to be talking about today. I know, yeah.
It's going to be very interesting. Let me just move on a little bit to set out the agenda a wee bit. Yeah. There was a journalist who was writing about your work in the last, many years, and he said Nico Hofmann has probably on his own made more films about German history in the last 10 years than all the other people in the 40 years before. Yeah? And then that journalist said the yearning among Germans for these films is almost unlimited. How do you explain that yearning now? I'm
not sure if it's still a yearning. I would say, indeed, yes. In the last 15 years, I think I've produced 25, 30 films touching or directly touching the subject of the Third Reich. Really, really a lot of them. And many of them, like Dresden, which was also shown in England, I think the BBC showed it, or even March of Millions about the refugees coming directly in 45 from the eastern so-called parts of Germany, fleeing from the Russians. It drew really 11, 12, 13 million audiences each evening for 2-3 parts. So that was amazing. As it was amazing that there was such an inner need for discussion about emotional backgrounds, what have happened in those days, for example, people having survived the bombardment in Dresden. They wanted to talk in their own families about their memories on these days. And it's amazing for me that you needed this very special emotional filmic adaptation of all these events, that people are now in the year Dresden was shown in 2006, that you need the film, that people in 2006 were able to speak out very openly about their feelings in those days. So this was something amazing for me, but that's the reason for the big success of all these films.
Nico Hofmann, I'd like to go back to your early days, to your student days when you were at film school. You made a short movie. It wasn't quite an hour long, as far as I know, called Der Krieg meines Vaters. Yeah, My Father's War. What was the story there?
Actually, it was a diary from my father about his first days in the war. And he wrote down every day of his wartime. And the film was made in a period in Germany where you had this huge discussion about the NATO Doppelbeschluss. That was the idea to put more rockets on German soil against the Russians. It was a big debate. It was the first time in those days that people in Germany really feared a new war could be on the front, could be happening. And the film school was, all my students, everybody was discussing, could we have a subject like the war in our first movie we are doing at the film school? And I picked not the modern questioning. I picked the questioning after the memories and after the experience of my own father. And that was the beginning of a big debate within the family. What happened in those days? What emotional experience he had. It was in some ways a starting point of Generation War, the big hit that was now shown. Unsere Mütter, unsere Väter 3 weeks ago here in Germany.
Exactly. Well, we'll come to that in just a second. But your first full-length movie, we just saw a little extract from it there in that report. That was 1988, I think. You were by this time, you were a professional filmmaker by this stage. You made this movie, Land der Väter, Land der Söhne, Land of the Fathers. Just tell me a little bit about that one as well, because this is another movie about a father story.
Land of Fathers, Land of Sons was the idea that the same actor playing the son and the father, both were the same actor. So I slipped into the role, if you want so, of the generation of my father. And in addition to that, the film was also, he was also researching in a very special way. It was not only the story of my own father, it was a story of 2 other friends of my father in Mannheim, concerning their story in the Third Reich. So it was a real, based on fact, research story, what happened in those days. It was playing in Poland, part of the film was shot in Poland. But the interesting thing for me was I was putting myself, if you want so, as a scriptwriter, I was putting myself in the same role as father and of son. And I played the psychology, I played the rhythm of the lives of the fathers through my own eyes. So that was the idea behind Land of Fathers, Land of Sons.
Very intriguing. You've mentioned your father already, you've mentioned your mother already, we've mentioned German history. You grew up with German history literally being brought into the house where you were growing up. Your mother and your father were both journalists at the time, and they were very well-connected journalists.
They were very well connected to the political scene. My father was working for the Rheinpfalz. He was a chef vom Dienst, and he later on worked in Bonn. He was very close to Willy Brandt, to Helmut Schmidt, especially to Helmut Kohl. Helmut Kohl was indeed visiting us many times. He was close, living in Ludwigshafen. But another important thing was that the Mannheim Filmwoche, the Mannheimer Film Week, was a very important festival on those days. And all the big directors from the eastern parts of Germany, like Milos Forman, many people from Poland were really coming to our family.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it was, if you want so, it was every evening we had a very interesting discussion with people from all over the world about cinema, about art, and about politics. So that was a my childhood before my parents were separated. It was a very interesting time of my life, definitively.
You were initially a film director. Now you are a film producer. That's really how you've made your name in the big market, as it were. Why did you make the transition?
Yeah, I would say I was quite talented as a film director, and I had my ups and downs at the end of the career. I was 35.
It's lovely to see you smiling as you think back to those films you made.
Yeah, because it was not only easy. It was you have successes, you have failures. But at the end of the day, when I was 35, I started a very new film school close to Stuttgart. It's called Film Academy Baden-Württemberg. And I was a teacher, and I really felt that I had so many students being more talented than I felt for myself. It was especially one guy, he was 22, and he was so incredibly talented. And I produced the films of them. Also I had 15, 20 students each year. I was a producer of their students' films. And at the same time, I was working for Bernd Eichinger. Bernd Eichinger was one of the big personalities. He was a number one. He still is, even 2 years after his death. He is still the German film producer of decades, and he will never be replaced. And I was working for Bernd, and I got the feeling how great and how interesting it could be if you're really creatively producing, if you really put all your creation into production. And that gave me, within 2 or 3 years, I really got the energy to say, okay, I stop the career as a director, and I make a complete reset in my life, and I really restart It was a new producing company, and that was a restart when I was 37. And thankful it was a very good experience.
And you talk there about putting everything into movies, putting everything maybe into a specific movie project. Our Mothers, Our Fathers, this most recent project of yours, or one of the, certainly the most outstanding project here. It's been much discussed, huge controversy, I think it's fair to say,
absolutely.
as well. Yeah, just map out for us a wee little bit what it's about, and then we'll have a quick look.
It's about 5 young people between 41 and 45 in Germany. One of them is Jewish, and 2 girls, 2 boys, and the last boy is Jewish. He escapes to Poland on a way to a concentration camp, and it's their life and their stories, and it's a life, like the title is called, of the generation of my parents.
It was a great project, a very moving project for me personally, I would say. A very personal project for you. We've established that, and it's got an awful lot to do with your relationship with your father. As I understand it, there was one very specific day that you met with him in New York, or you spent with him in New York. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was, my parents got separated. So it was a huge divorce going on. It was very hurting me a lot. And at the end of all these crazy discussions, before my father left for another woman, he went together with me to New York. I was 14, and we stayed there for 1 week. And I was very aggressive, totally aggressive, and I started to talk with him about the divorce and why he wanted to go and why he's so crazy peaceful and he's not struggling for me especially. And we came to the wartime experience. As we came after 3 days, he started to talk about his experience in life, his experience killing other people, his experience to survive in war times. And it was the topic changed from his personal story to his personal story during wartime. And I mean, I was 14, and I was totally overwhelmed with his feelings. I couldn't get that organized in any way, what he wanted to
Understandably.
It was very tough to understand it, what he wanted. And then he left, and crazy enough, I slept 2 or 3 weeks at the side of my mother, and there was a little bedside chair, and in this bedside chair he left his photos and his the medallions and all that stuff he got in wartime. So everything he left before he went to his new family in Ludwigshafen was his last pieces of wartime memories. So that was crazy. I mean, I was 14, and I kept that stuff with me for all those days. And then I restarted the process 6 years ago, especially after Dresden, the Dresden film.
So you needed all that time to really digest this?
Yeah, because we had a very tricky, difficult relationship. That was not an easy relationship. But I really wanted, I told him before he would die, I would love to have this discussion longer and longer again. What were these important years for him? Because these 3 or 4 years were the most, also negatively, the most, also in a psychological, very, very destructive way, were the most deciding years in his life.
As a 14-year-old, your father tells you that he killed. You just said, you didn't say a person, you said people, plural.
Yeah.
What does that do to a 14-year-old? I mean, I come from a military family, but nobody told me that this happened. I don't think it did.
Yeah, first of all, you have no imagination what it means. But the much more problematic thing was that, you know, in German schools, and this is a very okay for me, it's very clear that the Nazi crimes, the sins your family have done in the Nazi time, all family members being connected to the Third Reich. In my family, half of them were connected to the Third Reich. They were gangsters. They were not only gangsters, they were murderers, they were outcasts, they were the most negative people. When you were 15 years old in school time and you read German literature in history lessons in school time, you immediately choose the position of the Jewish side. As you think, okay, if I would be free to be asked, I would love to be a Jew and not to be a German. So deep, really so deep in the question of guilt and in the question of what has this generation done to the whole world was in my mind. So if your own father says to you, okay, but I killed Russian soldiers, that was the top of the discussion emotionally, because that was something for me I could absolutely not let through to me. Absolutely not when I was 15 years old.
And one of the questions you're asking yourself, I'm sure, while you're being involved in this project is how would I have acted at the time?
Yeah, the first question is how would I have acted in those days? And the next question is, and there you need much more material that was possible here with Generation War, is a question, how could it be that a whole nation really comes to this kind of absolutely a terrible engagement against the whole world, against Jews, against the Polish people, against the Russians. So this is really a question for me. Perhaps it started in those days between school time and personal debates within the family. Perhaps it was a time where it started all over in me, but that is surely the point in my life where this whole discussion began, and it ended, if you want so, with this last film.
I certainly don't want to pry into your private life, but when I was reading about you, when I was researching about you, there were a lot of things that shocked me, because we're talking about German history, and German history is shocking.
Absolutely.
But there was one thing about you as a person you have been traumatised by what went on between the generations. And I read that you, as a youngster, this must have been at the same time, you filmed your parents having arguments.
I did that, yeah, sure. That was part of my...
This is shocking. This is shocking to me.
I don't know if it's shocking. I mean, I was starting filmmaking with 7, 8 years. It started with a Super 8 camera, and it is a typical... A lot of my film students today, they started with a video camera when they were 8 years old. But in the beginning, it was just fun. But during the lifetime between 15, 16, 17, where really all these I had a very aggressive and very I would say interesting discussions within my family about everything and everybody. Really, I was struggling with my mother. I was struggling with my father. I was struggling about their past. I was struggling with my grandmother. I was very aggressive. And then the filmmaking and to film it, I really made a film about the divorce of my parents live in the living room of our house at Lindenhof in Mannheim. And it were 2 actors, and they were playing for 1 full week all debates, all craziness I had in my family. But that was something like a therapy, and surely it was a therapy for the next years on film school. When I was a film student, when I've looked to my former films, all these films were very, very, a big kind of family therapy in some way.
Okay. Let's come back to how you dramatize history. When you make a film out of history, your father's told you the story, and you're thinking, I want to tell that story. You've sometimes been criticised for using too much emotion, because history, what really happens, reality, is cold, it's dirty, it's dark, it's cruel, it's unpleasant. There's no background music. In your movies, there's background music. People sometimes talk of, elements of kitsch. I know you don't like that. So how do you answer that?
I would say I changed the portfolio of the films and the making of the films in the last 6 or 7 years. It changed dramatically. If you have a look to a film like Dresden or March of Millions, called Die Flucht in Germany, the structures of the films were very melodramatic. It was a very melodramatic structure. It had a love affair plot in the middle of the storyline. But nevertheless, if you take Dresden, which was the biggest hit in selling overseas, the second part of Dresden, everything is about authenticity. Everything you see, you feel, you get in the second part is really was really happening in Dresden. So it's not kitsch and it's not overwhelming with feelings and melodramatic structures. But I changed it. And if you take the films of the last 2 years, I really came back to very realistic, very authentic setting. If you take Generation War, Unsere Mütter, unsere Väter, it's very authentic. The music is very, very minimalistic. It's not a big orchestra music. So I changed it because people are now, I would especially say in Germany, people are now, they are now capable, also intellectually capable, really to take the films, even if they are so pure and so hard as they have been here with Generation War. It was not clear if this is a success or not a success. Many people in the television companies, not only on ZDF sides, they said this will be a tragedy if nobody will watch it, but it was not the case.
Burnout is something that you know about.
Yeah,
what can you report?
It's a very nice question. No, actually, I had a big burnout about 3 years ago. It happened after one of the films were not so publicly acclaimed as I wanted to have it, and it didn't work.
How many films have you directed or produced? Produced, how many?
A lot. I would say...
More than 100?
Yeah, more than 100. Also we are now, I think we are nearly 300 now within teamworx. It's huge. But it was a film called...
So one of them flopped.
Sometimes there's a film where you really... I would tell you, even if Generation War, Unsere Mütter, unsere Väter, if it would have been a big failure, if nobody would have watched it, it would have been...
You would have been in danger.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not in danger, but I think I would really... In the moment, if you invest really a lot of time, a lot of energy, and you love the project, and then it's absolutely not working, you start really to reflect, okay, what are the reasons? Am I on the wrong way? What is the future? What should I do in the future with other topics? So this was Die Grenze. It was the limit. No, the border. It was called. The exact translation would be the borderline. I re-established the borderline between East and West Germany. My feeling was it all comes back, and I wanted to have it as a future outlook. And it was some of the parts of the film were okay, other ones were totally crazy. But the critics, they hated it. The audience was quite okay. In the second part, it dropped down dramatically. And that came together with really 10 years of permanent work, 20 films a year, and then you get on some kind of on a zero level, where you really feel, okay, I have absolutely no energy anymore to energize me, and that was the reason. No? So
yeah. Well, what are the? I mean, there are people who work hard. Clearly, you do. Yeah. There are people who are called workaholics. I'm never quite sure what that means. And then there's burnout syndrome. Yeah. What are the signs that you've gone from one to the next and into burnout?
I think the crucial point is if you work and you don't have any more distance to yourself and to your own work. So if you work for years and sometimes you have success for 3, 4, 5 years. And you get the feeling, okay, that will happen till I will die, so I will have only success in my life. And then you lose any kind of reflection, any kind of distance. I have also many friends in the literature, in the arts, on the actor side, a lot of actors who really only want to be loved by the audience. And if ratings are slipping down and they don't get any more jobs, for many of them, in a special age, it became a very crucial discussion to say, where do I stand? And that happened. So that happened, and I took nearly 1 year off.
You took a time out, a very long time out.
Yeah, I took a time out, and I restarted focusing. I restarted my personal life, really to take your time out every day. Every day I have 2 hours when we are finishing here the show. I will have 2 hours between 6 and 8, really go to my room, just do nothing, just think about the day today, do sports, and then go for dinner. And in those days, I went for dinner after the last meeting. So I was from 9 to midnight. It was a full lifetime circle job, and that's not working with me anymore.
Are you a tough employer?
I am, yeah, absolutely, sure. Because then you start to have the imagination. Everybody works as you. So I have no family. Many very good people in my company, they have families, And I have to learn, and I had to learn to respect that their time is to spend their time with the family, with their kids, and so on. And I learned it, and now it's very easy for me to say, okay, then do it.
Okay, you take the 2 hours off every day. That's a lot of time, 2 hours.
Yeah,
if that is really...
Indeed, it's a lot of time. Yeah.
But you are still working very, very, very hard indeed. And you've got a new project that you're working on, I know, which, as far as I understand, it's going to be not just a 3-part series. It's going to be an 8-part series on the life of Adolf Hitler, which until recently was like almost taboo territory.
Yeah. It's taboo territory, and I did it because there was a very interesting book from Thomas Weber, Hitler's First War, which I read. A very good journalist praised the book, and I read it. And there's so many interesting informations about the life of Adolf Hitler, about his personal structure. It gives a full new picture about his personality. And you know, I have, through the success in the last years, there's a certain interest with 2 colleagues. One is sitting in London, the other person is sitting in France. We were talking about the Hitler project for about 10 years. And now I had the feeling the time could be okay with all these new informations we got. And after the films we have done in an international co-production, to go on, and hopefully it will be a quality picture.
And as I understand it from what you're saying, what you're going to do is you're going to portray Adolf Hitler not as a demon, but as a human being.
As well, I would say. For me, he is a demon, and to get the bigger life behind him doesn't at all make him a saint or make him anything in this direction. No way. I mean, the balance we have to find is really to say, you have the demon, you have the most terrible personality, putting crime all over, putting death all over. But I want to understand the psychology behind him, why German people so easily followed him. That's the basic thing about it.
Bernard Czimek, you grew up with this man in your living room, effectively. I didn't. I mean, tell us, explain the legend to us.
The legend in Germany in my generation was, I mean, he was the first guy really telling the people about nature, about animal life. And we have the Green Party. I would say he was the first Green Party member in his beliefs. And it was fascinating. It was not only the crazy television show. I mean, it looks a little bit totally nuts, but he was a fascinating personality, bringing the subjects of nature. How do we behave against the environment? Is the environment important for us? What happens to nature in the next decades? He was the first person on TV and in real life putting this on the agenda. And that was for German people. He was the first one, I would say, worldwide with his television show. He sold that in many countries. Not himself, but the documentary parts was sold world over. And he's a fascinating personality in German history.
Did you ever meet him?
No.
Okay.
No, but I met parts of his family. Yeah.
And you met them because?
Because we are shooting his lifetime story starting in October in South Africa. Yeah.
Okay. For me, it is a source of constant fascination when we're making the kind of films that you make, when people are making those kind of films, and you've made so many of them. I often wonder, we're talking about Mr. Czimek here, and he won an Oscar for a documentary film.
Yeah.
Why do you not conclude sometimes that a documentary film would be a better way of transporting reality than a drama, a feature film?
Yeah, you know, the interesting thing is, first of all, I came from journalism, and then I studied in Munich. I switched from the fiction group to the documentary group. I was 4 years in the documentary section of the school. And you know, all of the films in the last years, they were always corresponded together. They were always put together with a documentary afterwards. If you had Generation War, you had the documentary on the ZDF side after the film. And in the last years, I also used parts of documentaries within the film. So I really try, if you talk about authenticity, if you talk about real feelings in those days, I really try to match it with material I can get. Even in Generation War, we had a lot of material in from German, from
wartime
Wochenschauen, and it was overlaid with a struggling overvoice from Volker Bruch, who was playing here, the main actor. No? So I used it many times.
Okay, let's draw a conclusion a wee little bit. You've made all these movies, lots of them, lots of movies about German history. The German news magazine, Der Spiegel, called you the person in charge of significance in German television. Yeah, it's a grand title. Yeah, describe the impact you've had.
I would say Giovanni Di Lorenzo he's the editor of the Zeit, he told me that 2 weeks ago. I really think if you take all the films I have made in the last 10, 12 years, if you take Dresden, if you take Stauffenberg, I mean, Stauffenberg was also seen by Tom Cruise before he made his movie. Yeah. If you take all the things I've done if I take the Turm, about the introspection, how people lived in Eastern Germany.
It was a very, very good movie.
I loved it, yeah. It was based on Uwe Tellkamp's book. I would really say, if I put together the audiences, we talk about millions of people having seen these programs, it surely has an impact about how people in Germany are talking about their history and their personal memories in their history. So hopefully it has a positive aspect to say we can talk more openly about our lives here in Germany.
OK, taking up that point, we normally have a quiz at this stage in the show. I'm going to give you one question, yeah? Do we learn from history or repeat it?
I would say we learn.
That's good news. I hope you're right. I hope you're right. That's your lot with the charming, the thought-provoking Nico Hofmann. There's more Talking Germany, including my blog on our archive on our website. Have a look at that. But for now, I'm just going to say it's been a great show. If you've enjoyed it as much as I have, come back next week. Tschüss. Bye-bye.